Hey, thank you. And thanks, Edu, for this great opportunity. And I'm speaking live from India, and it's 9 p.m. here. It's an awesome time to give a tech talk. And welcome to my talk. It's Fight Complexity with Functional Programming. And I'm Gopal. I work for Microsoft. And this is my Twitter handle and my website where I kind of blog about functional programming and other things. So without further ado, let's begin our talk with a is a line that I keep hearing from managers, especially because I see a lot of resistance towards functional programming these days. At least because of not awareness towards functional programming. And I keep hearing this saying that FP is cool because it's complex enough to make devs feel like they're doing something smart. But today we're going to see that FP is not actually complex, but that instead it fights complexity. And we're going to see how that is we're going to achieve that. By the way, I hope I can, you kind of interrupt me for if I have any Q&As in between the talk. And I hope the host is going to interrupt me if you want that to be clarified on the run. And by the way, this talk is totally based on a true story that happened within our team and how we kind of brainstormed ourselves and how we kind of pushed FP and what is the use case, and I'm going to establish all those design discussions that we have done and how FP is a better suit for a certain problem. And let's start with our talk with something very serious, that the dev holy wars that we keep having on a day-to-day basis. So the first one in my list is IDE light versus dark theme. So I see this war quite predominantly, especially these days when the dark themes are on the rise. And I used to like themes, but then not until I bought my 32-inch monitor, I understood the value of dark themes. And Eclipse versus IntelliJ, this is pretty predominant on our floor. People who use IntelliJ feel that like that's the ultimate IDE and any other IDE doesn't matter, and vice versa with people who use Eclipse. So why am I talking about all this? What about this? Oops versus FP. Have you ever had this war in your team where people say, hey, oops is better than FP or FP is better than oops? I had this, we had this fight and I had these doubts, especially during my initial days of the career while I was trying to understand what is FP. Yep, cool. So what is FP and what is oops and which one is better than what? So I kind of searched everywhere. I kind of read all the books, etc. And then towards the end, I could understand that there really is no versus in between them. It's not like one is greater than the other. I can't really think of how you cannot have both these paradigms within an application. And I cannot even imagine how you can't have both of them. So let's try to understand what is OOPS and what is FP. So OOPS can be put into the solid principles that Uncle Bob has predominantly, said the solid principles. And then FP talks about immutability, referential transparency, side effects, etc. So I don't see any exclusivity between these principles, and I totally agree that these both can be used together. So that's it. Unfortunately, we can't talk about all these principles. That kind of a lot of blog posts, books, and etc. that you can go and refer. Today, we're gonna see the application. Gonna take few of these and see how we can apply them in a real world example. And I'm also going to prove we're going to tackle an object-oriented paradigm with a functional touch. So just to prove that there is no difference between them. And I'm going to show a lot of code, but please don't worry at all. Just sit back and relax. I'm going to share all the code links and the slide deck, etc. So just don't try to read code on the run. I know it's very difficult. So you just can skim through the concepts that I kind of talk through. And I'm going to use Kotlin for today. And Kotlin is an awesome language. I'm a great fan of Kotlin. Being a Java developer, starting as a Java developer, Kotlin proved to be an awesome language. And I'm going to use another awesome library called Arrow for demonstrating some of the functional paradigms. And it's put through. It has been worked by those smart people, and a lot of hard work is put into that. So let's jump in. There is another war that we didn't touch up, which is imperative versus declarative. And this is pretty predominant, at least recently, in these Kotlin developers. Who is a Kotlin developer? Somebody like me who has started with Java and then moved to Kotlin. So I would call him a Kotlin developer. Why am I taking Kotlin? Because Kotlin is one of the modern languages which has a lot of emphasis on functional programming. There is a lot of functional tool set that is first class within the language, and a lot of operations that come in, which we're gonna see towards the end. So if somebody like this who has started in Java, where imperative is predominant, not until Java 8, where lambdas and streams are there, and even after the introduction of them, they're not in the mainstream. I still see people using Java 8, but not using those declarative tools that they have provided that they're putting in. So let's try to understand the difference in these styles with an example. So for me, imperative style is like this. The metaphor I use is like, imagine you have puzzle set pieces and you have an instruction set to fit those pieces together. And you hand it over the computer differently, separately, like you have this instruction set separately and the puzzle pieces separately. And then computer is gonna read your instruction set, fit all those puzzle pieces and run your code, which is like the bytecode. For a computer, it doesn't really matter. For a programmer who is reading your code, he really has to make a mental model while he's reading your code to understand what's going on. Let's see that with an actual code example. So we're all isolated, so we kind of can use some team building activity here. So the team building activity that I'm gonna propose is just concatenate, take all the last names of your teammates, concatenate them with a delimiter. So I'm looking at for a string something like this, which would have this as a delimiter. So, okay, given this problem to an imperative programmer, so he would imagine he's a junior developer. So he would start out his implementation like this, wherein he is kind of looping through all the teammates and extracting the last name based on a space character, last space character, and then he's concatenating them. Okay, he gives that for a code review, and the senior developer kind of screams on him, "Man, where are all the edge cases?" Right? He's missing on a lot of edge cases because we are dealing with spaces here and we are dealing with nulls. And we are fortunate in Kotlin that we have nullable types so that you can explicitly say this can be null and this can't be null. But in Java, we kind of are null bit me a lot of times, and I had to really spend sleepless Fridays because I checked in without checking nulls. So he would go back to his drawing board. He would think about all the edge cases that he is missing, and then he would come up with an approach like this. Okay, he submits that to the code review again, and then now when he runs the code, the output looks like this. So as you can see, there is a delimiter towards the end, one more delimiter which he needs to take care. It's a simple case, right? But then he has to go again. He has to make another patch to his code and come up with a code like this, wherein he has a flag, and he has a flag like his first flag and all that. Again, don't kind of go into the code. You can, I'll be sharing you the code links. You can go see that. All I'm trying to kind of convey is he has to do all this noise, and what he's trying to do is totally lost. Just like the agile horse you see on the right side, it's like any form of art. As you keep patching it, it kind of loses actual meaning what it's trying to convey. And yeah, this is how it ends up looking like. Imagine the same programmer is born in a parallel universe as a declarative programmer. He would start out the code with given the same requirements in this way, wherein he would use a sequence, which is like stream in Java, which is pretty predominant. And he would use something like this, a map, and passes a function. We're going to touch upon this map and flat map going forward on a bit. But then just for now, understand this is a syntax in which you can declaratively do the same thing that's imperative done on the left side. And as he discovers the edge cases, he would go about extending his code instead of patching his code just like this on the right side, wherein he keeps adding those conditions in between, map, filter, etc. And then is a step-by-step of how he was able to convert this imperative code to declarative code, which I'm not going to spend much time because of a limited time, but you can go about and understanding, and you can always message me if you have some doubts. So this is imperative, we have seen it, and this is declarative. So declarative is like you already have all those pieces fit together, and then you're giving it to the computer. And for a programmer who is reading your code, the picture is already there on the canvas of your IDE, and you really don't have to spend time to fit the pieces together. That said, Java is like the Lion King of languages, right? no doubt, no debate about it. It's a predominantly used language. It kind of started when I started going to elementary school when I'm 4 or 5 years of age. And even now, people are using that in production. And that's not a joke. Kotlin kind of just got into this space recently, but then it has kind of drawn a lot of eyes. And one thing that caught my eye in Kotlin is they are pumping a lot of functional set. And why is that new programming languages are really pumping this functional sets now? And Java is actually following Kotlin and kind of adding features like sealed classes, etc., where Kotlin already have it. And even the functional tool set keep on increasing this functional tool set in Java. And why now? Let's understand if this, whatever imperative versus declarative is just about style, or is there more about it? So let's try to give a wrinkle to our problem. Let's concatenate all these names in parallel. How can you make this run in parallel? I mean, just think about it. I already have an implementation which I'm going to share in the code links because I couldn't fit that in a slide. It is really going to be monstrous if I kind of make it in parallel. You can kind of use fork join pools or coroutines or whatever, but it doesn't really end up looking nice. And it already, as the code logic is dissolved already, the moment you try to make this in parallel, this kind of is going to blow up. But the declarative code, the problem is the how to do's and what to do's. There are two how to do's in here. The looping through the list and aggregating results are how to do's, and what to do's are validating and extracting, right? The problem is the imperative has both of them merged together. And that's the problem now that one of the how to do's looping has changed to parallel. Everything needs to be rewritten. But the declarative code, it's pretty simple. All I'm going to do is just convert this sequence to a parallel stream or whatever synonymous in your language that you're using. The part that I want to convey is you got to write to abstractions, the core context philosophy. If you want to do things differently without doing different things, you're going to write to those abstractions to see the part which is going to change, and you can kind of switch it out. And declarative coding provides you that mechanism. So this is kind of, you don't have to tag this to functional programming. This is predominantly same, but just that you realize whatever you have done is something this that you can kind of switch the stream to parallel sequence and then make things everything run in parallel. Awesome. So we're almost halfway through a tech talk, and I've got an interval bang for you guys. The sequence that we have been using is a monad. So I hope a lot of you must have heard about monad at some place or the other if you're kind of a seasoned programmer, and I'm sure that very name would have scared you, and it scared me as well. But then I'm pretty enthusiastic. I want to really see what monad is. And the most part of me is I really want to use it in my production code, but then I have to understand, is it really used in production? So today, let's not focus on what a monad is, but then focus on why it is used. And this is me, by the way, trying to understand functors, monads, applicatives in my initial days, going through all those papers and blog posts. None of them made sense. Like monad is a monad and the category of functors. That's like a Harry Potter spell, right? It didn't really make any sense to me. And there is even a joke, this predominant joke on the left side says that monads are cursed. Once you understand them, you cannot lose the ability to explain them to others. So I'm going to try to do the same tonight. To the morning, which is kind of ironical. And I'm going to call all these monads. These are all different things, actually, functors, monads, applicatives. But just for the sake of today's evening, I'm going to just call all of them monads. And if you want to really understand the difference, please kind of go through this blog post by this guy, smart guy, which is a translated post from Haskell, which has a very detailed explanation of what these three categories are. So, and as I said, I'm going to use this awesome library Arrow, and which has been worked to since kind of couple of years, and they have almost there towards 1.0 release, and they've got some great functional tool set that you should go and explore. I'm gonna just pick a piece from there using either monad, which we're gonna predominantly use today for today's problem. And what is a monad? Again, it's just a design pattern. It's just a way of doing things in some way. But then, like I said, we're just going to focus on the application. Really, if you're a library developer or just want to write a monad with your own hands, just play around, you can go into source code and see that. So let's assume, understand this either monad has two states. So state that's on the left, as you can see, a alien in the box with a red state. It's like I'll be using that I'll be saying that as a left state, and there is a right state wherein you have a valid value. Actually, you can use this left and right for anything, but then it's just a convention to use lefts for invalids and rights for valids, especially if you're using either monad. And this is something called a sum type in functional programming. So as I said, I'll be using left for validation failures, and I will be going into the problem. So some crash course on monad before we get into the problem. So imagine you have a +3 function, and let's say you want to add +3 to a value. So traditionally, you would pass that value, you would call the function passing that value, and you would do a +3 on it. So imagine if you have that value within the monad box, you would in turn pass a function to it, and the monad applies that function on that value and then puts the result back in the monad box. So that is the difference, just a paradigm shift. And this is how it's done with the code. So when you say either dot write, you're putting that 2 inside a monad box. And then syntactically, I mean, there can be different things for the programming, different programming languages. I hope this is a language agnostic now. Just I'm using Kotlin because it's a great language. And as you can see in the map, as you pass a +3 function to it, and then the +3 function is applied on this 2, and then you would get a result back out of it. So same thing for the sequence. If you have a sequence of characters, sequence of integers, and you want to apply the same function one after the other, and you would want to have a sequence with the applied result, this is how you get it. So what if the either is on the left state? So all it's going to happen is the function that you're going to pass is just going to get ignored. So this is an important property that we're going to use in our for our problem. So where is this going to come handy? So imagine if you have an array of functions that you want to apply. So traditionally you would do this way, right? You kind of pass a result of one function to another function. You do f of g of h of x, just like in maths. But if you have a monad, you can do this. Like you can apply these functions one after the other in a chain declaratively. And the best part is this is how it looks like. And then if one of the results turns into a red box in the middle, all that's going to happen is the functions, the other functions which are being applied are just going to get ignored. So this property we're going to use again. And so the very important question, are monads used in enterprise software, or they're just for theory? So that is what I'm going to demonstrate, how we have used monads. So we kind of have a cult following about monads in our team, and people are like crazy whenever someone says monad, because we had to do hard brainstorming, almost like killing each other, saying should we have monads or should we not have monads? And we finally came up with a library called Vader, and this library was helping us to do validations for our services, which are REST services, which I'm gonna quickly touch upon the requirements and show you some dummy code and how we solved it. So as I said, we were building REST APIs. We were a payment industry, and we had services like payment, refund, authorization, etc. And they all are JSON payloads. So this is a sample JSON payload for one of our services, and this is how a client places a request to our service. And he has to pass the amount, the payment method, and card, etc. These are very familiar terms. So imagine Amazon, you're paying through Amazon, and this is the request you place to a service, something like Stripe, if you know that. So the thing is, a peculiar requirement that our service has is the payment method, as you can see in the middle. This is, you can call it a child object within this parent JSON, right? This will be reused. The structure is reused across multiple services as it is, like without any change. So this is one example. So the problem is the validations, we don't want to rewrite those validations for the payment method, all the validations for the payment method. We want to reuse these validations and just hook these validations to the other service. So essentially saying that we want to share all the validations for the data structure, which is common across multiple services. I hope this is clear. So, but then there are other validations like simple data validations like amount. And this amount field is something which is again common across all the services. And this is a shared validation that I've said. And this is a effectful validation, which I kind of, if I have to verify an account ID is valid or not, I would have to hit the DB, make a DB call, which is exception prone. So we have so many such validations, and these, by the way, come in batches. So what I've shown you is one list of one. So we would get a list of n such JSON nodes, and then we had to validate all of those. And we had, I'll be going into the requirements very shortly. And so we had to build a batch validation framework for that. Why? We'll see. So for this talk, I'm not gonna get into this production because it's very boring. Let's just replace that with an egg. So whenever I say we are validating egg, assume we are validating something like a JSON object. And then to represent a child object like payment method, I would be calling a yoke. I'd be using yoke object. So let's get, and so by the way, now that we have a list of eggs, we got to filter out valid eggs from invalid eggs. So that's our requirement for the day. So some requirements again, we have to configure the order of validation. So imagine I have, as I've told, there are some validations which do DB calls, some more which might do network calls. These are all costly. I want to keep them towards the end. I want to keep the cheaper validations at the start. So if I have to do a fail fast, when I say fail fast, it's like whenever a validation fails, I want to stop my validating there itself. So if I have to do that, I should, as a developer, have a way to configure those validations. And I should be cross-sharing common and nested validations. As I've discussed before, the payment method, I should be able to hook it to other services without actually rewriting them in each and every service, and support both fail fast and accumulation on each sub request. So as I've said, fail fast is one way. We have another route where we want to do error accumulation. We want actually all the validation failures. So that's another requirement. And then we want partial failures. So when you have a list of JSON nodes, we kind of want to filter out the invalid ones, but then move ahead with the valid ones. But then because it's a batch, I can't really send back the error responses. This is how it looks. So imagine I have a validation layer. I have kind of two invalids. The alien represents an invalid, we can say. So it's like an alien egg or something. So then I'm marching forward with this 5 valid X. And then on the service layer, I got some XYZ exception. I have to mark something again, invalid or something, or some error response. The problem is whenever in the validation layer, whenever I find some invalids, I can't right away send back the invalid response because there's a batch validation. Batch service. So I had to wait till the end and then only can send aggregated response back. Those are partial failures. How am I going to hold these invalid ones till the end and skip them from getting processed in service layer and DB layer? So that's a challenge. And some meta requirements are, we can't have to accommodate a century validation. So if you have 5 or 10, whatever I've shown you is like the simplest payload, but then we have our payload actually is increasing. It has been increasing, and then we keep adding new fields as we have more requirements, and then our validations kind of went almost to 100, and across services. It's not just one service, and we have to. Like I said, we have to hook few validations to one service. Like pick and choose these validations, which kind of makes this tricky. And unit testability is very important, and no compromise on performance. So like anything else, any other requirement, the requirements are agile. Like any other real world application, requirements never stay constant. So on a first day, we had 1 egg and 1 validation. Life is pretty simple. Just pass that 1 egg to the validation, get the result back, done. When you have many eggs and 1 validation, still not so difficult. You can loop through all the eggs. You can pass them to the validation and then get back the result. I can filter things. They're pretty easy. The moment you have many eggs and many validations, that's where the problem starts. It kind of becomes a difficult problem. And if I have to deal that problem in an imperative style, I'll show you how the code can end up looking like. I hope the font is fine for everybody. Let me know if there is a problem. So yeah, what I'm showing you is how if you go about doing it imperatively, the code ends up looking like. Again, this is a dummy code, a simple code that just I'm using for demonstration. But looking at this code from a mile away, you can see. Just opening chat. Could you make it a bit larger? Okay. Just a second. Hope this is fine. Cool. So the code ends up looking like this. So this is pretty familiar for a lot of us because we keep seeing this kind of code in our production. A lot of if else, try catches, and all those inverted pyramid kind of stuff. So let me try to explain what we're trying to do here. Can I answer this? Okay, cool. I think I just zoomed back in. What did I do? This is okay. That's weird. Okay, what did I do? Control or what? Got it. I was control scrolling. Yeah. So what I'm trying to do is, let's say I have got a egg carton, which is a list of eggs. So we're gonna have to result a map wherein I have IDs of all the eggs and then all the invalid eggs and then the reason why the eggs are invalid. So how can we do that? Like we imperatively simplistic way, I have to loop through all the eggs. And then for each egg, I have few rules that it needs to pass. And based on its result, if it passes the rule, if it doesn't pass the rule, I'll have to remove that from the iterator because I don't want that egg to get processed for further rules or further validations. And then put that in a bucket with the ID saying why this egg is bad, right? So that is the simplest thing I'm doing. And then I have try catches because there are some rules which can throw exceptions, like the DB operations that we have discussed before. And some rules that are working on the nested object, say yoke. So for that, I have to actually dig inside. So the more nested it is, the pyramid grows, the inverted pyramid grows on my screen. And then finally, I'll give back this map. So this is as simple as like I hardly have 3 or 4 validations, and this code already is monstrous. And okay, so can we make it better? What if I kind of break each and every rule into its own method? Let's see if that can improve. So this is where I have, this is another file with the same, again, I'll be explaining the project structure so that you can go back and refer. But then here I have broken down each and every function into its own, each and every operation into its own function. So for one simple rule, I have this one function and etc. etc. But the problem is there is this guy like the orchestrator, which had to again call each and every function, pass the egg, and then get the result back. And based on that, he has to maintain whether I have to remove the egg or pass the egg to further validations, etc. I would call somebody like this an octopus orchestrator because it's trying to do a lot of things, trying to manage a lot of responsibilities. And this is going to blow up. So we have the same problem. We essentially didn't kind of solve the problem just by breaking it into functions. And I would say code like this is complex. So, but then I just don't want to say it subjectively. We want to objectively measure the code, measure the complexity in this code. So I would use something like SonarQube, which is pretty popular. So all I had to do was run the Sonar console on my local machine. So you can read about it online, how you can set it up. And I have a Gradle plugin, SonarQube, and then I had to run the Gradle task, Gradle SonarQube here, and then I would get this beautiful metrics in here. And by the way, before getting into it, I'm using cognitive complexity over cyclomatic complexity. I'm not using cyclomatic complexity. And this blog post on SonarQube has details on how cyclomatic complexity only doesn't measure maintainability and how cognitive complexity is better than that. So you should really go check it out. But one thing is cognitive complexity really understands human readability rather than just blindly checking the number of branches. So, so you can in your Sonar console, you can go to this measures and then the cognitive complexity, you should be able to see the cognitive complexity of your files. So this is the number I get. And I would say this is like demo code. You could see I'm not doing a lot of things, but still the cognitive complexity is too much for a little bit of code. And I see this complexity can go down to single digits, which we're going to see how the journey of how we can do that. But before that, let's see step by step how we can get there. But for now, we're stuck with a code like this, a chaotic code, right? Imagine you're like a developer. Developer is like playing this game, and the state in your code, the egg is trying to escape from all the validations which are like written everywhere. See, there are no rules. You can kind of write your validation function like anything, and one validation can call any other validation. There's no rules at all, which kind of makes it chaotic. By the way, I loved playing this game as a child. So this is I think the hell level in Mario done by some fan. You should definitely play this. And so we're gonna achieve now we're gonna solve this problem by using a pattern called chain of responsibility. This is pretty popular, especially when it comes to validations. And this is people might know it as an object-oriented paradigm. I really don't want to label that that way, but we're gonna use FP today. So the question is FP the best fit to solve this problem? So this is a functional programming talk, of course. What do you expect me to say? Take you till here and say, oh, sorry, object-oriented programming is better than this. So I'm just kidding. So yes, FP is the best fit, and validation is one classic case to actually see how powerful FP is. So again, I'm saying FP, but don't kind of think that I'm exclusively saying FP is better than OOPS. I'm just saying I'm just talking about those policies or principles under the FP umbrella. So the moment, what the problem that what mistake we did is we kind of thought it's a one-dimensional problem. We thought just eggs are looping and validations are just function that we need to call. But the moment you think validations are entities too, they're functions, right? They're citizens. I mean, why do you think functions are just some plain old things that objects are the important part, right? That's like object-oriented programming. But then the moment you think functions are things too, you'll get a different perspective of this problem. And you think there's a two-dimensional problem. And this kind of becomes like a matrix wherein you can actually plot which is valid, which is invalid, against what validation. So what I mean by functions are things too, I'm going to show that. But for now, this is what we're going to build today. So we are essentially going to split the what to do's from how to do's, as we have discussed before. And what are what to do's in our problem? All the validations are what to do's, and how to do's are the configuration and the orchestration. A configuration is something wherein how I just want to configure how my validations run, the order in which my validations run. And orchestration is how exactly am I firing those validations? Is it file fast? Is it error accumulation? Is it singular, parallel, etc.? So, and first thing I would do is make all the eggs immutable. That's the first thing I would do to solve this, because mutability is the root cause for a lot of problems. And as a developer, I know how silly bugs used to hide when things are being mutated unnecessarily. And as a Java programmer, I suffered this a lot. The moment you make it immutable, your state really becomes predictable. And I mean, you don't lose anything. I feel immutability should be used wherever necessary. So in Kotlin, we are fortunate to have data classes. So I'm using data classes which are immutable by default. If you're not in Kotlin, if you are in Java, you can kind of use any other Lombok or something which predominantly gives you this data class. So this is what I mean, a data class that I'm talking about, egg, and then it has few properties. And then as I've told, it has a yolk. So now I'm gonna get into showing you the code, and let me help you understand the project structure so that you can go back and refer post this talk. Okay, do I have something in the chat? Yeah, that's right. Data classes are coming. As I said, Java is following up with the Kotlin, which is kind of so. This project structure that I have, as I've said, this is a dummy code to kind of replicate or simulate what the Vader library that we have developed. So this particular algebra has all the library related code, and this class you can think of as like a consumer to that library. And you have various ways how we are consuming, how we are calling, and I'm gonna get into them. And then I have few tests to prove that, prove or to actually simulate things that I'm going to demonstrate, which you should definitely check out. So if you really want to understand this, start from the tests and then go your way up understanding things. Okay. And then second thing, we have a heterogeneous data types in our pipeline. What I mean by that, so we have eggs, valid eggs, invalid eggs. As we talked, I don't really care about invalid eggs. I care about the reason why the eggs are invalid. So I essentially have a validation failure and then I have a valid egg. They're two different data types and I can't put them in a single list. So for that reason, I would be using either monad that we have discussed before, because either has two states. You really are, in the end, you have objects of either, but then they can exist in two different states. I'm going to show you how that happens. So, but then we're going to solve this problem using this. And then we're going to standardize all the validations. What I mean by that, we have seen before, imperative style, you can write functions in any way. Nobody is going to stop you from having 3 parameters, 4 parameters. But then if you really want to bring a structure to your problem, you have to standardize them. What I mean by standardize is they have to have same input and same output. All the validation should have standard input and output. But let me get into what I mean by that. So this is how our new code looks like. What I mean by new code is this is how our validations look like. So these are same analogous validations that we have seen before in our imperative style, but now they're totally unrecognizable, like they're converted to a functional style. So let me try to explain one by one. So this particular validation, the simplest validation we have is turned into this. And you can see from this validation, the input is gonna be either monad, and then output is, sorry, I mean, what I mean is this is a validator and this returns a function. So this is a function. So I'm just assigning that to variable. And then what is this validator? This is just a custom defined type alias, which means like type alias, I hope understand. I don't know, Java doesn't have it, but then this is a way to actually declare it to say what you're meaning. You can just, what I mean is you can replace this validator with this, whatever you see in this type. So what it does is it takes in a validatable, which is egg in our case, and then returns back an either monad. And either monad can, as we discussed, can be on left state or right state. So when it's on left state, it would hold a failure. And if it's on the right state, I don't really care. If it's on the right state, it's valid for me. So that's what we have converted all our functions looking like. So every property you see is a property having a function assigned. And each and every function, as we discussed, follows the pattern. And then now, as you can see, I get an egg. And then this is, by the way, is called either DSL. This is coming from Arrow. I obviously don't have time to cover this, but this is awesome. As you can see, you can't find a map or flat map anywhere. All that noise is taken out. You can actually write this in like a for comprehension. If you are familiar with Scala, they have for comprehensions, which is missing in Kotlin as well as Java. But these guys filled that gap. I hope this really comes to first class support in Kotlin. And then, so again, all of this is a dummy code. There's some dummy rules and dummy output. All this various failure cases, why it can be failure and all. So you can go back and understand this code in the leisure. And there are a few yoke validations, as we have discussed. Children also has some validations. So this is how nothing really fancy about this. So configure the order of validations, our first requirement. How did we achieve that? So now that you have seen the validations are just values, right? Functions are just values. How do you put this in order? All you need is an ordered list, right? If your requirement is a bit more complex, like you have a parent having multiple children and children having multiple parents and all that stuff, it actually becomes a graph problem. And if you really need to have a chain, you got to do a topological sort or something. But in the end, the problem is taken out from the actual code orchestrator. In the imperative, the orchestrator, the octopus orchestrator is doing all the things. And the moment you want to really shuffle these validations or add new validations, you have to do a code change. But the moment, if we take this ordering out, we kind of you can write function anywhere, but then ordering is taken care by the different entity. I'm going to go into that. And this is config. So just look at these. So all the parents, I can make a parent validation chain just by making a list of them. And children, I can make a child validation chain. Awesome. So cross-share common and nested validations. Now, imagine my first problem, as I've said, imagine the child validations all comprise to a payment method. So for me to actually validate that egg, I have to validate both the egg, the parent, as well as all the validation of the children, right? But the problem here, as you can see, these are of type list of validator, which takes an egg, which has egg on the input as well as a validation failure on the output. But this is a different type, as you can see. This has yoke and validation failure. I really can't concat these two lists and prepare a actual chain of responsibilities that are required for validating this egg, right? So what is the how can we actually concat these? So the only solution is you got to lift all the child validations to parent type. So what I mean by lifting, so let me get to the code and show you what I mean by lifting. I think I have some slides. So yeah, imagine this is parent validation. So you have a validator of type parent, and then you have a validator of which takes a child object. And you kind of convert this to this. How do we do that? So I am within this file called, sorry, I think it's config DSL. I can't see the file name. That's fine. Yeah, it's config DSL. And within this, you should be able to see this function called lift to parent validation type. So all it does is it takes in a child validation and then gives you back a parent validation. Within that, how the lifting is performed, you kind of also take a mapper, which kind of tells you how to take your child out of your parent. In our particular case, it's just probably a getter, get of yoke. And then this few other parameters just to, for the sake of parent is null or child is null. So essentially all I'm trying to do is I use this mapper, I take the child out of the parent, and then I apply the child validation. So the return type actually the input is parent, as you can see. So this turns out to be this validation. Now with that lifting, I can happily concat these parent validations with all the child validation chain, and then prepare a mega list of validations, which I can call egg validation chain. But what is the use of this lifting? So imagine now this egg is a chicken egg. So I'm validating chicken eggs, and I would need all the yolk validations. I have done a lifting. Tomorrow I have a dino egg, but then it has the same yolk as the chicken egg. So I can really reuse all this yoke validations, but just by lifting them to the dynamic context. If all I have to know is how to take the yoke out of dynamic. So I hope you are clear about this, and support both fail fast and error accumulation on each sub request. Now we're jumping into orchestration part. So the orchestrate and so have multiple strategies defined, which I'm going to get into it. But before that, this is a runner DSL. So this is the function which the client or whoever is consuming this library is going to call. So imagine if you have to validate fail fast, all I do is pass all the validatables, which are eggs in our case. As you can see, this code is totally written in generic way. So if my consumer has eggs and validation failures, you can have something else fitting into this framework. So even the library is totally generic, written in a generic way. There is no concrete type anywhere. So yeah, getting back to your problem, we need validatables, and then we need validators. All the validators that we define in our config, the list. I just need the chain in which you can want to run all validators. And then you would need a mapper for throwable. So if I get an exception, how exactly I should map that exception to a validation failure. And then these parameters wherein if it's null or something. So with these inputs in place, I can just use this part traverse, which comes again from Arrow, which is simply superb in terms of its conciseness. What it does is it traverses this list in parallel. So imagine if I have a 4-core system, I should be able to validate 4 eggs at a time by actually validating all the eggs one after the other. So I can do these things in parallel. So this is so powerful, and you should really go and check it out. And this is accumulate errors, wherein I would do the same, but then now I can run again 4-core system. You can kind of validate 4 eggs and running 4 validations on each egg at a time, which is like 2x faster. So you have to now we have defined 2, and then let's see what exactly happens in the strategy. So I'm not going to go into details of this. You should be able to understand if you kind of put a debug point and just check it out. This code might look kind of scary on the first look, but then it's not really. It's very simple. It has loggers as well. You can just run the code and run the test cases and see what is going on. Let me check my chat. Cool. I'll answer all those. So what you can see is I'm showing you a fail fast strategy. So all you can have to do is you can use something called fold. Again, it's predominant in functional programming language. Somebody who has worked with functional programming identifies this immediately. If you have not, this is something you should know and should go about exploring. There's not something, fold is nothing specific, nothing special, but then what I'm saying is this acts as a shared vocabulary. And then all it does is it does an aggregation, something like reduce, if you have heard about it. And then you kind of fire a validation and do stuff. And then you can have similarly some other strategy which you don't do it. Why I'm showing you 2 strategies is now strategy is totally independent of the validations as well as the order of validations. Now strategy is in your hands. You can do whatever you want. You can use part traverse, or tomorrow there is something else which is more a lot better. You can kind of use it without actually disturbing any of these things or disturbing any of the tests for these things, well-tested things. And you're doing, like, as we discussed, as we started, the how to do is in your hands, and you can kind of switch them. And similarly, for error accumulation, you kind of have multiple strategies which you can kind of switch. Imagine if why I stretch on fold is, imagine if I don't use fold, I would probably have to write my orchestration this way. As you can see, again, this is like an agile horse having all those unnecessary details shadowing the core logic. And if you can see, there's a nested for loop, and no matter how many times I see a nested for loop, a new nested for loop is again a different one. I really have to spend time and understand, put a debug point and see what is going on here. So if you can go with these operators, they can really save a lot of time, effort, as well as acts as a shared vocabulary between your team. And even if you see that in a new language, you can right away identify what's going on there. And these are few operators which are coming right out of the box in Kotlin. You should really go about exploring them and using them on your day-to-day basis, replacing all your for loops. And you could see the compression ratio that you got. You kind of get 4:1 compression ratio, and code really becomes concise and just expressing what it's trying to do. And partial failures. How are we handling partial failures? So if you see, the written type of these strategies are list of the list of eithers, right? As we discussed, we get list of either boxes. So those eithers stay in left or right. And then we have talked about property wherein if it's on the left side, the red state, whatever function you apply on it just gets ignored. It just doesn't get processed. So you take this bag of eithers, you send them to any layer, and then if you process them as is, keep applying functions like composition on them, you kind of don't have to think whether this how to skip these invalid ones. They'll be skipped automatically by the property of this monad, right? So that's how we can handle partial failures. And towards the end, we get again end of our flow of the code flow. You will have a bag of eithers. So you can simply just pass back the error response, build a construct an error response based on the state of that monad. Awesome. What are complexity? So we have measured complexity for the imperative one. Let's see how the declarative one looks like. So again, I'm in the same project. I got to this declarative. We have seen validator 6 file wherein I have, and this is 5, just 5. And the number of validations are a lot more than the ones that I have in imperative. And this is an awesome improvement in terms of complexity. And this metric, as I've told, talks about readability of the code. And we kind of we fought with complexity and kind of killed it. And with this, I want to pass a statement that FP is not complex, but it fight cognitive complexity. And we got minimum cognitive complexity with same time complexity. What I mean is we haven't compromised on performance anywhere. And this is, I've named this railway-oriented programming, and I didn't coin this term. This great guy, wise guy, Scott Blashin, who is popular in F-sharp space, coined this. And this particular implementation is inspired by that. You should really go about checking his talks, and you really get a lot more insights about this kind of approach. Finally, we have really linear code, right? We don't really have ifs and elses and all those chaos that we had before. We had linear code. Our state passes linearly from left and right. We have eithers, and things are very simple now. And by the way, this is a code deck where you can see all the, this is a source code link, and these are the slide deck, and where you can see all the slides. And I hope things should be clear. I have comments and all that stuff. So just before finishing, so I just want to touch about this blob paradox. Like again, there is no silver bullet. You should really stick to keeping things simple. And again, I'm not saying imperative is complex as such. Imperative can be simple. In particular use cases, you can really go about doing simply with imperative style, and if it really brings in more complexity. And how can you actually get this way to use imperative versus way to use FP? You have to master both. You have to really gain some experience in terms of once you understand. And this particular picture, I don't want to say that functional, the one is better than object-oriented. What I mean is somebody who knows both functional and object-oriented or imperative declarative is a wiser programmer, and you should really go experimenting. And I would love to hear feedback. This is my personal email ID. Thanks a lot for this opportunity. And skadoosh, we have won the war on complexity. I'm open to questions. I know a lot of questions. I don't know if if I'm on time or not. So
there's 2 in the Q&A if you want to address those first.
Yep. So you want to pick a few questions, or should I go in the chat and just answer them?
Can you see the Q&A panel there?
Or guys, you can just speak up and talk. There's so many questions I see. The Monad code is actually hard to follow. Okay, yeah. Can answer this. Data class records. Okay, I don't see any questions. Recommended forums or Slack channels. Yeah, I would really recommend this Kotlin Slack channel, and we have Arrow Slack channel within the Kotlin workspace. So which the people are really patient. You ask any dummy question, they will really answer on any time of the day. So I really recommend checking out the Arrow channel, joining there, and keep asking questions by exploring their things. And then slide deck, I've done that. And thanks so much for the favorite conference so far. Thanks. And
so there are 4 questions in the Q&A, and I can read them out to you.
Sure. Yep.
One, I'm interested that you choose immutability, referential transparency, and such as primary FMP principles. Where do you put your concepts like functions as first-class values, as well as reliance on higher order functions like map, section, and compose?
Yep. So we have seen first-class functions. So whenever when I've shown you these validated functions, they're actually first-class functions. So what are first-class functions? They're just functions assigned to variables. So where I have them validators, right? These are first-class functions. And what are higher-order functions? Higher-order functions are functions which take in a function which gives another function, which in our case, if you can go to config DSL, this is one example of that. This takes in a function and then gives you back another function. So this is a higher order function. So the question, I hope I answered the question. What is it talking? Can you kind of repeat that if it has something else?
It said, where do you put concepts like functions as first-class values, as well as reliance on higher order functions like map, section, and compose?
Okay. I kind of didn't understand the last part, compose, but if you're talking about function composability, it's chaining functions one after the other, which we have talked about .map, and then I was passing functions in the slide, one of the slides. So if you want to see where you put it in terms of principles, I mean, I'm not really strict. You can probably put it in differential transparency. Differential transparency talks more about pure and impure functions, like the function's output should actually depend on its arguments passed. So you would call that, and then no matter how many times you call that function, the output shouldn't change. You shouldn't do any side effects in between, which is a bit more, I mean, it takes time. It needs to talk again. So probably you can just ping me on Twitter or something, where I can surely be happy to answer. Yeah. Okay. Next question.
Take one more. Okay.
Sure. Yeah, if you have time.
I understand functional is supposed to be stateless. How does one handle passing around objects which maintain their own data?
Okay, so functional programming is not meant to be stateless. What do you mean by stateless? I mean, it has multiple meanings when you call stateless. So what we have just seen is where objects are being passed onto different functions. They are being transformed into different functions, right? So you should be able to use FP wherever you have a use case wherein you transform data, you transform state from one to another. And again, immutability is different way wherein you don't mutate the state, but then you transform it. So whenever you have chain of functions and you have objects that needs to be transformed, like you have calculation engines or big data, that's why FE is pretty popular in big data field where they have a lot of transformations. So that's wherein you should be able to find places wherein this state is being handled, but I wouldn't say FP is stateless. If you're talking about side effects, what I mean is talking to DB, etc., that as a state, that's a different concept. I hope I know I kind of didn't answer your questions right, but then we should be able to kind of have a chat and understand more because it's a deeper question. Or you can speak up if you have, if you're still on the call. Help me understand what you meant by stateless.
Yeah, you can raise your hand and we can take you off of mute if you would like. There was another reference to, are there any recommended forums and Slacks that would be good for functional newbies?
Yeah, I answered that. Like you should be able to join Kotlin channel and Kotlin workspace. The invite is open to everybody, and there is Arrow channel I would recommend. And then even on Gitter, there is a VAVR channel that's for Java. And again, people are equally supportive and you can keep asking questions. That's how even I started. Pick a library which talks about these principles, keep experimenting with that, and then keep asking questions in the Slack channels and people will answer.
All right. One person wants you to go back to the slide with the links to your talk.
Yeah, I've shared that in the slide deck and the video. And I hope you have some forum to keep those links, right? Or you can take a screenshot if you want. I'll share it once again. Yep, here's one.
There you go. Awesome. And can you please, oh, that's the same one. Can you please post a link to your slide and your email address again?
Okay.
They would like to connect with you offline. Yep.
Great.
And that's it from the Q&A.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, ATO, once again. And thanks everyone for attending, taking your time. Hope I made your time worth it.